John Lennon was one of the most influential musicians of the 20th century. But before he retreated peacefully into private life in 1975, he fought a major legal battle that went under the public radar. Just as his rock and roll oldies album hit the market, Morris Levy, the mob-connected owner of Roulette Records, released Roots, an unauthorized version of the same record. Levy had used rough mixes of John's unfinished rock and roll recordings and claimed that the former Beatle had verbally agreed to the arrangement. The clash led to a lawsuit and a countersuit between Levy and Lennon. Attorney Jay Bergen, a partner in a prestigious New York City law firm, represented John in this epic battle over the rights to his own recordings. Millions of dollars were at stake. And he is next on Lights, Camera, Author to talk about his new book, Lennon, the Mobster, and the Lawyer. Your new book is called Lennon, the Mobster, and the Lawyer. And just so it doesn't confuse people, Lennon was neither the mobster nor the lawyer.
And I'm not the mobster.
And you're not the mobster. No. Thank goodness for that, or else I'd be really careful about what I have to say. You were the lawyer.
Yes, I was.
Now, this is a story. I want to talk all about this story. I'm going to put it in a very compact way. Lennon had an album coming out in 1975, which was going to be called Rock and Roll Music, which is called Rock and Roll Music. And he was being pestered, I'll say, by a crooked record producer by the name of Morris Levy, because he wanted songs. So Lennon gave him a rough cut of the songs. And unknown to Lennon, Levy then released the album of the identical songs from Rock and Roll Music on a bootleg album called Roots. Is that accurate in a nutshell?
Yes.
Now, after that happened, Lennon, of course, was rightly, I would say, PO'd, and that's where you came into the picture. So tell me a little bit about your first meeting with John Lennon.
Well, I had a senior partner who was not a trial lawyer, David Dalgenis, and he was representing John and also helping Ringo and George in their dissolution of the Beatles partnership agreement. And when this rumor started about Morris Levy releasing this bootleg album, I went to David. I heard it around the office, and I said, I want to be involved in this. I was a trial lawyer. And on February 3rd, 1975, he called me down to his office, and he said, there's a meeting at 5 o'clock at Capitol Records with their lawyers, and I want you to go to this meeting because they're going to be talking about the album that Levy is threatening to release. And so I went to the meeting at their offices, and we were discussing what they knew about it, which wasn't a lot at the time, when the conference room door opened and in walked John Lennon. I was totally surprised. I didn't know he was going to be there. And to this day, I don't know whether the Capitol lawyers knew he was going to be there, but there he was. We introduced ourselves. He started giving us some more background about some of the problems he'd had with Levy. And at one point, the Capitol lawyers started talking about, well, maybe we should go into court here in New York and get an injunction against Levy. And I said, that's problematic. It may be difficult. It's going to be very time consuming and expensive. And I looked at John and I said, how long will it take you to finish the album? And John said, I could go into the studio tomorrow and finish it in 2 days. So I looked at the Capitol office lawyers and, what about that? There was one of them from the California office of Capitol. And they said, well, we could release it, probably in 10 days to 2 weeks. And John said, look, I've been working on this album longer than any other album I've ever worked on. And I'm really tired of it. I'm sick of it. And I want to get it out. So why don't I go back into Record Plant, the studio where he had recorded some of the basic tracks in October of 1974. And I'll finish it in 2 days and that'll be it. So that was the decision. John and I left the meeting together, went down in the elevator, and as we walked out onto the street, it was a pretty cold night. He said to me, well, good night, I'm going home. And I have very good reason to believe that that was the first night he went back to the Dakota with Yoko after their 18-month celebration, which resulted in his The Lost Weekend, what he called it, out in Los Angeles. And that was it. It was Capitol. Levy started advertising the album that weekend. We started sending out, we being Capitol and John, telegrams to various TV stations around the country telling them this is a bootleg album. This is that Levy's album is not the authorized version of the John Lennon, what's going to be called rock and roll, John Lennon rock and roll. So when Capitol actually released the album on February 13th, Levy pulled the advertising. He had sold about 1,250 copies, I think, and Capitol went ahead, and about 10 days later, he filed a breach of contract action in New York Supreme Court. He claimed that John and he, at a meeting in October of 1974, had agreed that Levy would have the worldwide rights to sell this album on television, where you send in your $4.95 and they send you the album. There was nothing in writing, Jim.
I can't believe, yeah.
So that was the first lawsuit. About 2 weeks later, much to my surprise, Levy and the plaintiffs filed another case against the same defendants, Capitol, EMI, John, Apple Records, and Harold Sider, his business advisor, in the New York federal court, alleging a violation of the antitrust laws. They claimed that the defendants had conspired to prevent Levy from distributing this album, and they alleged $14 million in damages. Now, I was a trial lawyer then for like 12 or 13 years, and then I went on to have a career for 45 years. I never had a situation where the same plaintiffs filed 2 lawsuits in different courts against the same defendants.
And I was going to say that's unheard of. Yeah, I don't ever remember that happening.
Well, it turned out to be a really fatal mistake because let me explain that in New York Supreme Court, cases move very, very, very slowly. But in federal court, when they are filed, they are assigned to one judge for all purposes. And that judge handles everything up until and including the trial. And the judges in federal court have very fast calendars. And I knew the judge who had drawn the case by lot, Judge Lloyd McMahon. He'd been on the bench for 16 or 17 years. He had a reputation for having a very fast calendar. He did not like monkey business in the courtroom, and he moved his trials along very quickly. I thought this was great news.
Sam, you also, and in your book, you also stated, and you had a brilliant move, that it was a tutorial for the Beatles because you knew the judge was a classical music lover.
Well, that was the second judge.
Oh, that was the second judge. I'm sorry. Okay.
The first judge we started with Judge McMahon on the second day of the trial. It was a jury trial. He and the Levy's lawyer got in a terrible argument. and he wound up recusing himself because he called Shertman, Levy's lawyer, a liar. Shertman had accused him of being biased against him and his case. That's kind of a very short version of it. So there we were on the second day of the trial without a judge, without a jury. And I took everybody, the lawyers, down to the chief judge's office in the federal court. We were now in federal court, and dictated a letter, a memo to the chief judge who was at lunch, saying, here's what happened this morning. We need another judge. By the time we got back to our office later in the afternoon, we were told to come down and meet a Judge Grisset. And Judge Grisset had only been on the bench sometime between 4 and 5 years. He was young, but we learned that night that he was an amateur harpsichord player and a pianist in an amateur classical music group. And the first time we met with him, Jim, he said, I don't know anything about the Beatles or John Lennon. I don't know anything about this music, but I have to tell you, I listen to a lot of music. So, you know, I'm going along in this case, and I want to learn as much as I could. So John and I set up over the next couple of weeks before he testified that we were really going, as I said in the book, we were going to provide Judge Grisset with a tutorial on John's way of making records, the way he and the Beatles developed making records, how they gradually took control of the entire process, from the songs they would pick, how they would record them, whether they'd add other instruments, and the album covers, which as you know, the Beatles really turned album covers into an art form.
Oh, they did. Yeah, Sergeant Pepper's.
Yeah, Rubber Soul.
Rubber Soul, and the one that was banned Yesterday and Today, I believe it was called, with the meat of the babies.
The chopping block with the yes.
And
they had to put out new album covers.
Yeah, it's a much tamer one. And but the Beatles, like you said, the Beatles, as a rule, they fought for the control of their music. They fought for control of their image. And suddenly here comes Levy, and Levy was not a person a lot of people wanted to deal with, or at least not get on his bad side.
He was a gangster.
Yeah.
He was a gangster. He was tied to the mafia, the Genovese crime family in New York City. He was a bad guy, and he was dangerous too. There have been books written about him. I think one book was called The Godfather of the Music Industry.
Yeah, so John was basically taking his life in his hands, fighting this guy.
Well, yes, you could look at it that way, Jim, but the other way is that John had such a big profile that Levy, I really think the reason that Levy brought this case, these two cases, was I think he thought he could bully John and Capital and EMI into doing some kind of a deal with them. And, you know, the case got out of control, and I don't think there was really any danger from Levy. John and I never talked about it because I think to try to muscle John would have been way too dangerous for Levy.
Yes. Now, you say in your book, Yoko Ono auditioned you.
Yes, she did. But I didn't, you know, this may be hard to believe, but I didn't realize that this was an audition until I started writing this book and really got into it, you know, over the last 5 years. But after the two complaints had been filed, I had talked to John about the facts a lot. And one day he called me and he said, can you come up to the Dakota tomorrow? Yoko wants to meet you. And I said, fine, you know, should I bring anything? And he said, no, Yoko just wants to meet you. So I go up to the Dakota and I meet her in their beautiful living room overlooking Central Park. John was not there, just the two of us. And she had obviously read the two complaints. She asked me a lot of very good questions. She was very bright, I had never met her before. We spent over an hour talking, and she very politely grilled me about, my background, my experience. But then we really kind of got into the case and why I thought that Levy had brought these two cases. I told her I thought he was just trying to bully John. She said, John does not want to settle with him. And John had already told me that in a couple of our conversations about learning the facts. And she said, but we're very concerned about these cases because all we want to do is hold down the amount of money that John is going to be have to pay Morris. And I said, well, if I have anything to say about it, you're not going to owe, John is not going to owe him any money. And so after a while, we chatted back and forth, and she said, well, she stood up. We were sitting on a couch and I was sitting on a chair right opposite. She stood up and she said, well, I'm very, very glad to meet you. And thank you for coming up. And I left. But when you really got to know how close they were and how much influence she had on John, if she hadn't liked me that day, Jim, I would have been replaced. That would have been it. But once I passed that, John and I also developed a very close working relationship. He was available whenever I needed him. He was very, very smart. And I think he was very comfortable. He now had gotten back with her. As you remember, she got pregnant shortly after that. And that's when he dropped out of the music business. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write this story, because nobody else other than a close friend of theirs could have written it. But I spent the time with John. I had all the court transcripts and everything. And I thought I was able to tell this story to John Lennon fans and Beatles fans and music fans generally, about this time in John's life when I think he was really kind of chilled out. He was happy. I took him on a tour of Grand Central Station and took him to the Waldorf Astoria for lunch one day, and places he'd never been before.
You took him to Sloppy Louie's up in New York.
Well, Sloppy Louie's, but that's the story. The first day of the trial, we get in the car at the lunch break, and I said to John, what would you like to eat? And he said, we're only eating fish. So I asked the driver, I said, take us down where the old Fulton Fish Market is, down by the East River. And we pulled up in front of Sloppy Louie's, which was on the outside and the inside kind of a dump. But I knew that Sloppy Louie's, and there was another place called Sweets that had really a very strong reputations for excellent seafood. So we had lunch there, and we wound up, John and Yoko came to the trial for 20 days, spread over January, March, and April. And they came on days when he did not have to testify. But I think what we were doing was trying to show the judge how important this was to both of them. But we wound up having lunch every day at Sloppy Louie's.
How sick of you were you from fish?
Well, it was a good thing I liked fish. And years later, I learned that they went back there.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Wow.
Now you kept these records, I believe you say in your book, you kept these records in your garage for 45 years?
40 years. Actually,
40 years.
Actually, I had them through 5 house moves, and it was over those 40 years. And I think it was always because it was the only case in my career where I kept the entire file.
Wow.
And I had it in the garage here. We live down in North Carolina in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And I started thinking one day, just about 5 years back, Jim, right around this time, what am I going to do with these files? And I started thinking, well, maybe I'll donate it to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or something. And I went out to the garage and I opened one of the boxes and I started reading John's testimony. And that's when I thought to myself, there's a story here. And I've got to tell the story because I was the one who was there. And I have all of the transcripts. And that's why I use so many passages in the book from the transcripts to really, it's almost like if you read John's transcript and quoted in the book, it's almost like you can hear him. You can hear him testifying about, here's how we made albums. Here's how meticulous I was. Here are the reasons why I made the Two Virgins. Yoko and I made the Two Virgins album with the nude pictures of them front and back, which was, kind of a sensational thing at the time. But John had reasons for doing that, and he explained all of that on the record.
Did you ever hear from Yoko when you decided to write the book? Did you ever hear from Yoko about? Did you tell her I'm writing this book? Do you mind, or did you get her blessing?
I did in December of 2017. About 6 months after I started writing the book, handwritten letter, sent it to the Dakota. I said I'd love to come up to New York and just explain to you that I'm going to write this letter, write this book because and why I think it should be written. And I never heard from her. And finally, in January, I got an email from her lawyer saying, Yoko, thank you for her letter, your letter, and she does not do any interviews. Well, Jim, I wasn't asking for an interview. I was just asking for a brief meeting to tell her, because I knew how dedicated she was to John's memory. She was of course, yeah. She was the keeper of the flame, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but she doesn't do any interviews, and that was it. Never heard from her again.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't, you would think that she would she'd be interested, but to each of their own, I guess.
Well, I think she knew that there wasn't any great gossip about surrounding the trial or my relationship with John or with them. The night before the trial, I was staying in a hotel, the old Drake Hotel on 56th Street in New York, because I was living out in Jersey at the time, and it was too long a commute. And I told John, the earlier in the week when we got together, I said, look, I'm staying at the Drake Hotel. Here I am. Here's my room number. If anything comes up, call me. Well, he called me about midnight, the night before the trial. It was a Sunday night. And he said, can Yoko come to the trial? And I said, of course. It's a public trial. I'm sorry. I didn't know she'd be interested in coming, but yeah, please bring her. And Sean was just about 3 months old then. He'd been born in October. This was January 11th. Trial started on January 12th.
So she came, she was there every day.
She came the first day, and she was there every day that they were involved.
I have a question that I hesitate to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. When you heard that John was murdered, did it ever cross your mind that this may, of course it doesn't have any connection to it, but did it ever cross your mind that maybe this is something that Levy had a hand in?
No.
Okay.
No. I just knew that, it was over.
Right.
Morris, after the trial was over, after the judgment was entered, Capitol went behind my back and John's back and settled with Morris Levy. They had been awarded about $440,000 in damages, and they settled with Morris for $200,000. I never understood why they did that, but I think it came from the higher ups in Los Angeles, they had spent a lot of money on legal fees. And I think they did not want to spend any more time or money on the appeal, which meant, Jim, that we, John and I, now had the burden of defending the whole case.
Oh, I see. Okay.
We had to defend the breach of contract claim, which had been thrown out. Morris went out and hired a separate law firm to represent him. He still had the law firm that had represented his two companies that were involved in the case. And then we had to also defend the damage. And the Court of Appeals reduced the damages by about, I guess, about $30,000 or $40,000. But John still got damages of about $85,000 or $86,000. I have to tell you a funny story about the argument of the appeal, because I called John a couple of weeks before the argument, and I said, the argument's on January 27th. I hope you're going to come. Oh yes, absolutely. So we'll pick you up at your office. So down we go to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals in New York is one of the most famous and highly thought of federal courts of appeals in the United States, along with the one in the District of Columbia and the Supreme Court. So here we are in this very elaborate courtroom in the same building where we tried the case. And we're sitting down in the spectator section, waiting for some room where we can move up when our case will be called. And I turn to my right, and Yoko's sitting just right near me, and she's got a deck of tarot cards, Jim. And she's
trying to read the cards.
She's flipping through the cards. Now, I don't know anything about tarot cards. She gets a good reading.
Look, I pulled out a good card. That means we're going to win. Hey, that's what you go to law school for. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, I tell you what, Jay Bergen, your book is called Lennon, the Mobster, and the Lawyer. It's out now. You have a website.
Yes, the website is Lennon, the Mobster, and A-N-D, and the lawyer.com.
And you can order it through there. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You can order through that. And yesterday, by coincidence almost, was the official publication date.
That was May 1st.
May 1st. So it's out.
Fantastic. Jay, thank you for being here today. I really appreciated it.
Oh no, you're welcome. I enjoy talking about the case, and I enjoy talking about the book, because I think it's a really important book for Beatles, John Lennon, and just music fans generally.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you again, and I hope we can talk again soon.
Okay, me too. Thanks,
Take
Jim.
care. Bye-bye.